Okay, so welcome to this virtual hearing for the inquiry into floodplain harvesting. Before I commence, I'd like to acknowledge the Gadigal people who are the traditional custodians of the land upon which Parliament sits. I'd also like to pay my respect to the elders past, present and emerging of the Eora Nation and extend that respect to all Aboriginal people present. Today is the committee's fourth hearing and is being conducted virtually. This enables the work of the committee to continue during the COVID-19 pandemic without compromising the health and safety of members, witnesses and staff. As we break new ground with the technology, I ask for everyone's patience through any technical difficulties we may encounter today. If participants lose their internet connection and are disconnected from the virtual hearing, they're asked to rejoin the hearing by using the same link as provided by the committee secretariat. Today, we will hear from the Australian Floodplain Association and the Macquarie Marshes Environmental Landholders Association. Before we commence, I'd like to make some brief comments about the procedures for today's hearing. While parliamentary privilege applies to witnesses giving evidence today, it does not apply to what witnesses say outside of their evidence at the virtual hearing. I therefore urge witnesses to be careful about comments you may make to the media or to others after you complete your evidence. Committee hearings are not intended to provide a forum for people to make adverse reflections about others under the protection of parliamentary privilege. In that regard, it's important that witnesses focus on the issues raised by the inquiry, terms of reference, and avoid naming individuals unnecessarily. All witnesses have a right to procedural fairness according to the Procedural Fairness Resolution adopted by the House in 2018. There may be some questions that a witness could only answer if they had more time or with certain documents to hand. In these circumstances, witnesses are advised that they can take a question on notice and provide an answer at a later date. Today's proceedings are being streamed live and a transcript will be placed on the committee's website once it becomes available. Finally, a few notes on virtual hearing etiquette to minimise disruptions and assist our Hansard reporters. Can I ask committee members to clearly identify who questions are directed to? And could I ask everyone to please state their name when they begin speaking? Could everyone please mute their microphones when they're not speaking? And please remember to turn your microphones back on when you're getting ready to speak. If you start speaking while muted, and it happens to all of us, please start your question or answer again so it can be recorded in the transcript. Members and witnesses should avoid speaking over each other so we can all be heard clearly. I remind members and witnesses to speak directly into the microphone and avoid making comments when your head is turned away. So I now welcome our witnesses. Could you please each state your name and position, title, and swear either an oath or an affirmation from the cards which have been emailed to you by the Secretariat. We will start with, just to hear that you are there, okay, Justin McClure, we will start with you. Have you got that in front of you, Justin?
Yeah, thanks, Kate. I'm Justin McClure. I'm the president of the Australian Floodplain Association. I swear that the evidence now about to be given by me shall be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth. So help me God.
Thank you. That was perfect. Now, Stuart Lalivre, is it? Did I get that pronunciation correct?
Yes, Kate. Yes, Kate. You're pretty close to it. Now, Stuart Lalivre. I'm the vice president of the Australian Floodplain Association. And I swear that the evidence now about to be given by me shall be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth. So help me God.
Excellent. Thank you. Now we'll go to Mr. Gary Hall, who's on the phone.
Yeah, Gary Hall, bit of a delay there. I swear that the evidence now about to be given by me shall be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth. So help me God.
Thank you very much, Gary. It's good to know that there is a delay there. We'll try and deal with that. And Mr. Jiggle Bucknell.
Thanks, Madam Chair. I swear that the evidence now about to be given by me shall be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth. So help me God.
Thank you very much. Now there is time to make a short opening statement. We will go to the Australian Floodplain Association representatives. Do you have a short opening statement to make for the committee?
Yeah, thank you, Madam Chair. The Australian Floodplain Association is a community-based organisation that represents communities the length of the lengths of waterways in Australia, in particularly in this case the Barwon Darling. We seek equity, equity for all communities, and we believe that a healthy environment and economically stable communities support our community. So we strive for equity, and we stand by that all communities matter, and that we don't want to see other communities prioritised over our communities. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you. Now that was Justin McClure. We will have to, just for Hansard's sake, particularly probably for Gary and Dugald, if you could, every time you speak, you're going to have to say your name so Hansard gets who is who, but I'd remind probably everybody to do that, including Justin and Stuart. So we'll go to Macquarie Marshes Environmental Landholders Association. Who's giving the opening statement there?
Gary Hall.
Thanks, Gary.
The New South Wales government's message has been that if water regulation had passed, the Macquarie Marshes would currently receive more water. This is incorrect, as the proposed licensing of floodplain harvest volumes is actually the government's estimation of existing take. No reduction in extraction. The government's message is incorrect. Floodplains and wetland have been grazed by livestock for millennia. Our association takes extremely seriously our obligation we have as custodians of the landscape to responsibly manage the Macquarie Marshes. 2 of our members have their land privately listed under the Ramsar Convention and graze under wise use principles. We have Ramsar management plans developed, and all marsh landholders work closely with government agencies, allowing and assisting with monitoring and reporting of environmental flows. The evidence clearly shows that responsible grazing promotes water cooch, and the majority of the bird breeding colonies are located on or adjacent to privately managed land. From early European settlement, the Macquarie Marshes were grazed with little impact to the ecosystem. With the development of upstream dams and river regulation, our businesses have seen a massive reduction in productivity. With the purchase of water licences by both state and Commonwealth governments, some water has been returned to the wetland. This is only a small part of what originally was available to the system. Historically, grazing livestock in any wetland or floodplain increases drought security and underpins our property values. Marsh landholders and other floodplain graziers typically pay a premium for land that benefits from inundation. Environmental flows alone are unable to achieve large-scale bird breeding events that the Macquarie Marshes are known for. Floodplain inundation and water levels are critical to provide the specific conditions that trigger such event. Floodplain harvesting has detrimental impacts on these events.
Thank you very much. Now we'll go straight to questions, starting with the opposition, Ms. Rose Jackson.
Thanks, Chair, and thanks everyone for coming along and giving evidence today and talking to the committee. No doubt your submissions were excellent, and I'm sure that your contributions will be very valuable. I want to start with quite a general question that I want to put to both groups, I suppose, and anyone can feel free to jump in. I think everyone is committed to trying to resolve this issue. The current situation just isn't really working for anyone. How would you describe a fair way forward? Considering where we are now, considering what's happened with regulatory efforts, the disallowance, what's a fair way forward that does deliver equity for communities? How would you describe that? What are you looking for from the government and this committee?
Stuart Lever, so I'll start the ball rolling. I think very simply is that we want a balanced use of water through everybody, irrigators, all communities, Indigenous. It doesn't matter what it is, there's got to be a balance put into it. And very simply, we think that is achieved by connectivity and a system flow target.
Oh, connection issues, Craig, Stuart and Justin. I just want to pause you there. Sorry to interrupt. I'll keep talking because we're not hearing you. Could you just turn your video off?
and all
Yeah, they're
has been an outcast.
We've got that yellow triangle of death that appears. I think the Secretariat is contacting them now. We're on this vicious loop of audio. I think we might just go, while we're fixing that up, let's just go over to Mila, the Macquarie Marshes, to Gary.
Yeah, I'll put Dougal on.
So it's Dougal there.
Sorry, Dougal, yep.
The solution, in my opinion, is actually to have an open terms of reference submission into the whole system so that all the evidence can come out, and with the aim of making it long-term sustainable, so that it's not good enough to just satisfy one group and not have it sustainable. So what we really need is a completely open terms of reference with just one goal, and that is the long-term sustainability of the system for future generations, and to stop this situation where people are wasting the whole of their lives over this continuous argument that's been going on for 50 years. We're better off stopping it now rather than waiting till the environment, such as the birds in the Macquarie Marshes, are gone and then being forced to have a Royal Commission. So we're better off having one early beforehand.
Can I just check whether we have Justin back? Justin and Stuart, can you hear me?
Yes, Madam Chair.
Okay, Stuart, we didn't get any of your response. If you wanted to start again.
Yeah, thanks, Madam Chair. Look, we believe that all water users have a part to play, in the system, and there should be a better balance. But there should not be. Community shouldn't be disadvantaged because somebody else thinks they've got a right to take water, and especially our communities downstream. So we believe it's achievable by connectivity within all the valleys, within the system flow targets, and a better balance in it, so everybody can get a fair and reasonable crack at it. But also the water hierarchy, the water use that's in the Water Management Act needs to be adhered to by the absolute letter, and that will then allow all these other things to happen.
That comment that your view is that currently the hierarchy of use that, as you say, is enshrined in law in the Water Management Act isn't being adhered to, sort of as properly or as rigorously as it could be. Did you want to elaborate on that? Why are you concerned that priority use provision in the Water Management Act is not currently being adhered to?
Well, if you go back to the last drought that we've just had the priority of water use been adhered to, the activities that were up further north when there was sporadic storms and all that sort of stuff that were up there, it would have at least made the parts of the river wet. But as it was, we just had to start from scratch. And now, when the Warrior came down past us a couple of years ago, that gave us our first fresh water for 3 years. And it did not make Wilcannia, but it was allowed to go through unimpeded. And while up north, there was other activities took place. So no, it was not adhered to. And I know that the minister then did do a 324 on it, which helped immensely. But before that, there was, Gundawindi had 10 inches up there, and it didn't even make, none of it made anywhere near the Bowen Darling.
Rose, Justin, if I could comment, upstream water sharing plans must have real connectivity provisions which deliver water to the valley downstream. Without connectivity guaranteed getting through systems, we're never ever going to have a healthy system. So water sharing plans need to fix the connectivity issues, and the way of doing that is point of take rules in the north across all licence classes, and a downstream and strategic downstream targets at Walgett, Burke, and importantly at Menindee, because this debate is bigger than the Northern Basin and bigger than the Southern Basin. We are a connected basin. We need to look at it on a holistic base.
I wonder if you could just talk a little bit more about what some of those downstream flow targets might actually look like. I mean, we've heard a lot of evidence, you know, about the important role that they could play. You know, can you give us a little bit more of a sense about what you're actually looking for in terms of those targets? What might the targets look like?
Justin here again, Rose. Look, I saw some figures today and I saw some draft plans going forward that suggested a 195 gigalitre level at Menindee. If Menindee fell below that level, then there'd be no take in the north, no supplementary take, no A, B or C class licensing access, and definitely no floodplain harvesting access until that flow was guaranteed to reach Menindee. Now that's a realistic figure. I know it's, but it's a real figure. It's a figure that has a history. It's a figure, and it's a link that has a history. C-class licenses in the Barwon Darling prior to the 2012 Act were linked to a capacity at Menindee. Now, those particular licenses have fallen by the wayside, but it's a precedent has been set, and I think that will give a very, very good outcome for the communities, the length of the Barwon Darling.
I wonder if I could ask the representatives from the Macquarie Marshes a question, and then I might hand over to my colleague, Mr. Veach. I mean, in terms of the outcomes, particularly, I suppose, the environmental outcomes that you're looking for, you know, how would you describe them, you know, in a way that might be embedded in any licensing regime? You know, what is a way that, you know, we could look to describe the environmental outcomes that we need to see in the Macquarie Marshes as part of a licensing regime for floodplain harvesting?
Gary here, Madam Chair, just checking that we're unmuted.
Yes, thank you.
We're unmuted. Thank you. It's Dougal here again. What I'd like to outline is the bird numbers over since they've been recorded. In 1970s, the Ibis bird numbers in the rookeries were about 500,000 breeding pair. In 2010 and 11, the Ibis numbers were recorded at 50,000 breeding pair each year. In 2016, Ibis numbers were recorded at 30,000 breeding pair for 1 year. Now, the average life expectancy of a Ibis is guesstimated at about 8 years. Now, we think the Ibis, because the Macquarie Marshes are known for bird breeding and a nature reserve for bird breeding, the Ibis are the apex animal. So with an average guesstimated age of 8 years, not the oldest, not the youngest, this would mean that the average parent birds from 2016 are already dead. The only surviving Macquarie Marsh bred Ibis are the chicks from 2016, and they are halfway through their life expectancy. Now, Ibis only breed when there is a big flood. That is, you know, a La Nina weather event, so last year and this year. And the weather cycles turn, we have dry years and wet years, extreme variability. It may not happen for another 5 to 8 years. So by the time that comes round, we might not have any Ibis that are bred in the Macquarie Marshes. So what I think we need to be looking at is an ESLT established at the end of each of the river systems. And when that ESLT isn't reached each year, the quantity of water that it is short by is carried over to the future year. And then once that builds up and a first flow event type situation arises, that carried over water quantity needs to be let go past so that the environment has a chance to repair, restore and maintain itself.
I think it's me, Kate.
It is
Okay,
Nick.
thank you.
Sorry,
So my question, thanks, Kate. My question is to Mr. McClure. Mr. McClure, in your submission, the 13th dot point of the 14 dot points you put in your submission, you say that floodplain harvesting licenses cannot include provisions for tradable rights. If I could, I just wouldn't mind finding out why you say that. I think it's pretty important for the committee to get an understanding of why you don't think these licenses should be tradable.
Yeah, Mr. Vetch, as you know, I live in the heart of the Mid-Darling, and over time we've seen the licenses, the local licenses, transferred upstream and to other areas, and the transfer of those licenses has been a transfer of equity. And when the water has been transferred upstream, it takes those the ability of our communities to generate wealth, to employ people, to give people a sense of worth. And I really feel strongly that each and every community should have an equal opportunity to have access to water to sustain and nourish its communities. And we are one community out here in the West, and I see that as very important.
Thank you. That's the opposition's question time come to an end. Unfortunately, it's always too short. So to the crossbench, I'll ask the first couple of questions. I just wanted to ask about the issue with rainfall runoff. Firstly, to the Macquarie Marshes guys, you've got in your submission quite an extraordinary figure, actually, that there's 50,000 hectares of developed irrigation land in the Macquarie Valley. So could you explain why the rainfall runoff exemption will make such an impact and what you think about that? And then we'll go to the same question to the AFA.
Once again, checking that we're unmuted.
Yes, you're good.
Right. So the rainfall runoff exemption.
Sorry, is this Dougal or Gary starting to speak?
So Gary Hall speaking.
Thanks, Gary.
The rainfall runoff exemption in the Macquarie Valley is a huge reduction of catchment of the floodplain. That area, not all of the irrigatable area in the Macquarie historically was catchment, but the 50,000 hectares of developed land comes with surge areas, with areas of channels, areas of headlands, where our assumption is approximately 50,000 hectares of the Macquarie catchment, as those irrigators, mainly general security irrigators that also have access to supplementary access licences, the off allocation over and above, could possibly now be harvesting the total volume of water from that irrigatable area under this rainfall runoff exemption. And so it's staggering the total volume of megalitres that will be unavailable to the environment, to the marshes and to the longitudinal connectivity of the Macquarie to the Bow and Darling without that water in the system.
Thank you. And I'll go to either. Oh, sorry, you done?
Dougal here. Could I give you some idea of the quantity? If you're talking 50,000 hectares, the average rainfall at Oscott at Warren, which is the lower end, Dubbo is the higher end. So Oscott is about 500 mils a year average. Dubbo is about 600 mils a year average. So that if you catch all that water on 50,000 hectares, that is 250,000 megalitres on an average rainfall. Now, of course, some of that's going to be soakage, but it is an enormous amount of water that needs to be taken account of. And we're talking the average year. What about the increase above average years? That's when most of the water is going to actually flow off and be inflows, or should have been originally inflows, into the river. So you're looking at 250,000 megalitres plus, and that figure needs to be taken into account in the cap. and also in the what is claimed to be over-recovery of water in the Macquarie. Now, it brings to mind the models that are being used if that water is not being accounted for.
Thank you. And I'll go to Justin and Stuart. Recognising I don't have much time, I do just want to include in this question as well the same response, but because I understand that the bulk of floodplain harvesting now, for example, in the Barwon Darling, is from rainfall runoff rather than overbank flow. So if we could speak to some examples as well, Justin or Stuart. Thank you.
Yeah, Justin, Kate. Yeah, look, I think we just object on principle, and as outlined by Dougal, Kate, and I haven't got any examples.
Okay, that's excellent, because there's a lot more to ask you about. So, I understand the government has been doing an assessment of floodplain works at the moment. What's your understanding of that assessment of floodplain works and your views on whether your views on the whole kind of compensable nature of floodplain harvesting? We're hearing that potentially, for example, if floodplain works in the future do have to be removed, if some of them do have to be removed, there are some concerns raised by some witnesses that even that will be compensable. I'll start with you, Justin and Stuart, if you know anything in that regard.
Madam Chair, it's Stuart Lalova speaking. We're unaware of any report at this stage that the government, are out there having a look at it. The last report, and it was through Slattery and Johnson. But look, our fundamental thing is that any illegal works have to be removed, and any works that impede the flow of water overland into the river, when there's obviously downstream needs, they have to have regulators put on them so that that water can make the stream.
Thank you. And can I just check whether Gary or Dougal, whether you have anything in relation to the compensable nature of entitlements, floodplain harvesting entitlements?
Yeah, Gary here. No, I object to the compensation process here. Like, if you've got an illegal structure that's deemed ineligible, surely it's your cost to remove and open up the floodway. That's totally unacceptable from our association's opinion. I have had personal experience with compliance on this, and I'm very disappointed, as I've outlined in my personal submission, the lack of knowledge sharing amongst DPIE, Water New South Wales and NRA. I think all of those of us that have been involved in the Murray-Darling Basin Plan and water policy development and the development of water strategies really need a good, solid compliance department. And it appears to me, from personal experience, that NRA aren't getting enough information. I'm extremely concerned that they're not well enough funded, and I do believe that there's a high turnover of staff. So if this agency is going to be effective, we need reassuring that NRA is going to be capable of doing the job, and it's a big job with a lot of unapproved works in the mid-catchment in the Macquarie.
Yes, thank you. My time is... Yep, sorry. Who's that?
Thanks. One thing that has to be remembered is once water is captured in the irrigation system, it doesn't matter whether it was floodplain harvesting or general security, high security or carrier, whatever it was, it is all a litre of water. So it can be arbitraged between floodplain harvesting water and regulated water in the dam. So it will have to be compensated at the maximum value of any use or of any sale price. So it has to be kept in mind that it's not just some little section off one side. It can be all water can be arbitraged in some way into the market. So this has to be kept in mind when it comes to compensation and compensable rights.
Thank you. That was Dougal, was it? Just for Hansard? Yeah, okay.
My apologies.
That's okay. My time's expired.
Madam Chair, Stuart Laluba speaking. Could I didn't quite answer that question you asked properly. It's just a little bit, as far as the compensation goes, look, the AFA, there's no compensation if those works are illegal. And we don't believe the licences should be compensable until and if we ever get it right. So whatever licences are handed out, we've got no idea without, without having at least 10 years of whether that number is right or not. And in that case, we don't believe there should be compensatable licences either.
Thank you very much. We'll now move to Mr. Mark Banasiak.
Thank you, Chair. I've only really got one question, and then I'll throw to the government. Justin, in the submission on the Australian Floodplain Association, you talk about this concept of temporary licences, and it's been brought up a few times through these hearings. Is it your understanding, though, that there's no actual current legislative framework that supports such a mechanism? So what you're proposing would actually require not only regulation but a legislative change as well.
Look, I think, Justin, Mark, I think that's the case, and I think that it's very important we get this right. It's critically important we get it right, because there's hundreds of millions of dollars that will come out of the public purse if we get it wrong. There will be communities desecrated. So, look, we need to get this right. So we need to uphold the law, and if we need to change the legislation to accommodate, then so be it.
Yep. Okay. Thank you. That's me, Chair. So I'll throw to Luamato, I think.
Yeah, Mr. Luamato, over to you.
Yeah, thank you very much, Chair. Thank you all for coming on today's inquiry. Look, I've got a couple of questions, and I'll throw it out there to the whole panel. I don't mind who answers it, or if you all answer it. The first question is, what rule changes have been made in the past 3 years in the Barwon Darling, and how have these rules changed river operations?
Yeah, Lou, Justin here. Look, there's been some substantial changes in the Barwon Darling. Active management, a first flush rule, downstream targets to a degree, but that's been a good outcome. But that's not the big issue. The big issue here is the upstream valleys that supply 95% of the water to the Barwon Darling. It's the changes to the Barwon Darling. Okay, fair enough. They're important, and they have had an impact and have made an impact. But you can't share water you're not getting. So it's critically important that upstream valleys recognise connectivity, and that includes Queensland. Hope I've answered your question, Luke.
Yeah, no, thank you very much, Justin. And this question is, do you agree with the Central Darling Shire, the Southwest Water Users Association, Graham McCrabb and other Menindee residents, when they state the policy around the 640-480 gigalitre rule has not delivered good outcomes for the lower Darling communities through its management by the Murray-Darling Basin Authority?
Yeah, Justin, Lou, I fully support that submission. Not working for the lower Darling community, 100%.
Thank you, Justin. I'll pass you to my colleague, Mr. Ben Franklin.
Thanks very much, Mr. Amato, and thanks, Chair. I'll also start with Mr. McClure, if I may. There's been suggestion, obviously, by the government, by other parties, that in fact more water would go to the environment if the government's policy to licence and meter floodplain harvesting had been in effect and in place for the last year. I note that was something that the Macquarie Marshes Landholders Association took issue with. So I'd be just interested in what your comments might be on that suggestion, Mr. McClure.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Franklin. Look, I tend to agree. I think that if legislation was in place and the numbers were clawed back, in the northern tribs to adhere to the cap number, there is a very, very high chance that there'll be more water in the system.
Okay, thank you. Can I move on now just to talk about a couple of practical and logistical issues? And these questions are to both organisations, but we might start as a matter of course with the Australian Floodplain Association, then move on to the Macquarie Marshes Landholders Association. But we'll start with a question about the Western Weirs strategy. And do you think we should replace fixed crested weirs with gated structures, bigger gated structures with fishways in it, in them, so in communities like Pooncarie, Menindee, Wilcannia, Burke, Collarenebri, those sorts of places? We'll start with you, Mr. McClure.
Stuart Oliver, Madam Chair.
Oh,
and,
sure. Sorry, apologies.
Yep. Look, we agree absolutely wholeheartedly, and we need more of them. And your suggestion is something we've been asking for quite some time, and we do support that 100%.
Could you speak to why you support it so strongly, Mr. Leleuve?
Well, you get a better balance of flow, especially with this climate change issue and everything else. You're going to get a better balance of flow, right? And it'll take the boom and bust cycle out of it. You get surety for all concerned. You'll get surety for towns. You get surety for cultural, Indigenous things. You get surety for landholder rights. And at the moment, a lot of the weirs, the couple around Louth, for example, A, aren't big enough, and B, they're leaking anyway. There's not enough of them to hold enough water up so we can guarantee, especially critical human need.
Thank you. Can we move on to Mr. Hall or Mr. Bucknell, and any comments that you have about the Western Weirs strategy and those issues?
It's Dougal Bucknell here.
Thank you.
Really, we shouldn't be commenting on them because we are in the Macquarie, which is above the Bowen Darling. The Macquarie flow should be flowing into the Bowen Darling, and if we had a proper ESLT which took into account the flows required downstream, some of these problems would be actually being fixed by actually having more water flowing in from the upstream rivers. But also to note, we do support in any weirs that are put out there fishways and things to take care of the environment that way. So yes, we do support them, but we feel that the bigger problem is that there's too much water being taken out of the system in the first place from the upstream rivers.
Understood. Can I stay with you, please? Sorry, was that Mr. Hall or Mr. Bucknell?
That's Mr. Bucknell.
Sorry, thank you so much. I'll stay with you if I may, and just stay on the specifics of what can be done environmentally. I understand your premise, and I accept that that's your position. But if we can go to some of the other things that perhaps can also be done, like, for example, getting rid of feral pest species like carp. You talked about improving fish passage, but I wonder if you agree that habitat and screening should be improved, removing grazing pressure, for example, combating thermal pollution in headwater storages. Are these the sorts of things you think we should be looking at as well to get better environmental outcomes? A, if you could talk to that, and B, if there are others of those specific sort of processes that we could look at that you think would be helpful, I'd be grateful.
I'm delighted to be able to answer the question. It comes up quite regularly. It's Dougal Bucknell here again, by the way.
Yep.
Those things that you speak of should be on top of, not instead of, enough water to repair, restore and maintain the environment to an ESLT. Those things in themselves will not create an environmentally sustainable level of take. The thing that is really important here is the quantity of water. And to give you a real idea, in the first 50 years of last century, it was considered to be a dry 50 years. The second 50 years of last century is considered to be a wetter 50 years. Now, after 20 years past 1950, so 20 years past the first 50, and 3 basic flood events, there were 1 million birds in the Macquarie Marshes. Now, back then things were very different. We had rabbit plagues and we had overstocking because of rabbit plagues. We didn't have the ability to move livestock on and off places when a drought occurred because obviously trucks weren't the size they are now. We didn't have the ability to bring fodder in, and we didn't have the ability for big water stocks, water storages and that sort of thing. But so 20 years after the first 50 years, we had 1 million birds in the marshes, ibis in the marshes. The second 50 years, which are considered wetter, now 20 years after that, and the rabbits aren't here, 20 years after that, we are looking at the situation that the bird life in the Macquarie marshes is going to be gone. The ibis bred in the Macquarie marshes are going to be gone in the next term of government. Now that gives you some idea that the problem is the quantity of water that is here.
Thank you, Mr. Bucknell. Yep. No, I take that point, and as I said, I totally understand that that's your view. I'm just trying to look at a range of different things that can be done potentially. So, Mr. McClure, Mr. Lelev, did you want to comment on some of those, I guess, practical environmental measures that might be able to be put in place to assist the sort of outcomes that I think we all want to see?
Look, Justin here again. I think downstream targets, a realistic target at Menindee is going to address the social, cultural and economic outcomes for our communities to a degree. So that's why I believe that connectivity and point of take rules that link to floodplain harvesting need to be to hit those targets before floodplain harvesting is allowed. So yeah, I think it's pretty simple. I think and that's our argument to sell. Thank you.
Stuart Lelever, could I just make another quick comment in relation to that? I think we need to keep in mind, and this is I think the crux of the matter, that depending on who you talk to, but anyway, somewhere between 30 and roughly 50% less inflow in the last 25 years, and supposedly it's going to get worse. So that whoever's right, whether the 30%'s right or the 50% right, that's going to depend on some of this modelling. It's just got to get a lot better. But even if you picked on 30%, that figure is enormous, and that's what's got to be attended to.
Okay, thank you. Can I just circle back just to the question, just to get a I assume that you are, well, no, I'm not going to assume anything. Do you agree that we need to do more as well, apart from the issues that you've just raised, to get rid of feral pest species, to improve fish passage and habitat, to remove grazing pressure, to combat thermal pollution, those sorts of things? Do you think that those are worthy aims as well in this process?
Yeah, Justin, sustainable agriculture is the future, and all of the above mentioned issues, ferals, etc., are completely linked to sustainability and sustainable river systems and sustainable farming. So a concentrated effort to minimise the impact is highly recommended. Thank
you. Madam Chair, I think my time's about to expire, so I'm happy to leave it there.
Thank you so much. That's the end of our time for questions. So I would like to thank all of you for appearing today. That's also the end of our hearing. So thank you so much for making the time. I'm really glad that we were able to organise this additional hearing. That was really valuable evidence. Your submissions have also been fantastic with lots of really solid recommendations. So thank you all for the advocacy work that you have done over many years, and really appreciate your time. If you've taken any questions on notice, the Secretariat will be in touch with you, and there possibly may be supplementary supplementary questions. So thank you very much, and that is the end of